Okay, we're recording. Okay, so let's get started talking about birds. Before we jump into birds, we'd like to kind of talk a little bit about state land and how we manage our state land. So if you've ever been to a state management area, you've been to one of these green blobs around the state. So Gabby and I hail from the Great Swamp down here. That's our field headquarters. That's a 3,600 acre property. It's absolutely beautiful, great bird watching spot. But we have them all over the state. And these, the purpose of our management areas is primarily wildlife habitat, to protect that habitat in perpetuity for our wildlife, but it's also for public recreation as well, primarily hunting and fishing. So if you watched the video, you learned that most of the wildlife conservation projects in the state are funded through the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program. And that is generated through an excise tax on firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, boating equipment, fishing tackle, things like that. So the hunters and anglers that use these state lands and purchase their hunting licenses and fishing licenses and all of that equipment, they're actively contributing to the conservation of state land, which is wonderful. So we've been able to purchase quite a bit of land using that funding. And the way it works is the federal government collects that tax, then they distribute it to the states, and we are obligated to use it for land acquisition, conservation projects, research and monitoring, the whole 9 yards. So it's a really wonderful partnership that we have with our hunters and anglers. But you can also hike on management areas. You can horseback ride in some of them, bike. And some of them have wider gravel roads. If you've ever been to Arcadia, there's lots of nice roads that run through that would be lovely for a bike ride. But we do want to mention now, we're not in the active orange period right now because it's the summer, but starting in September, if you visit a state management area, you will need to wear 200 square inches of fluorescent orange. So that's a hat, a baseball hat, beanie, whatever it might be, or a vest if you don't like to wear hats. So I always opt for the vest because it's a little easier for me. But the only difference is in December during shotgun deer, you have to wear 500 square inches. So that's a vest and a hat combined. So that's from September through May. We ask that it's required of all users of state management areas to wear that orange. And it's really just a courtesy to our hunters who are out there to increase your visibility and make sure that we're all safely using the outdoors. So we're going to step back in time when we're going to start talking about birds. And I have some historical pictures here that to me are pretty disturbing because these are just hundreds upon hundreds of ducks. And at one point in our country's history, we had a practice called market hunting, and this is vastly different than today's hunting practices. So back in the day, there were no hunting regulations, there were no hunting licenses, there were no hunting seasons, so you could just go out at any time, anywhere, and harvest as many animals as you wanted. And this was extremely detrimental to our, particularly our waterfowl populations, because these hunters would go out, harvest 100 ducks in a day, take them to the market to sell, and then go out and do the same thing a couple days later. So not very sustainable. It was not backed by science. It was just, oh, I see a lot of abundance out there in nature, so I can just take with no repercussions. And as we know, that's completely wrong. So it's very, very different from today's hunting, which is highly regulated and highly sustainable. And we've learned our lessons from the past. Another conservation issue that our country faced for birds, not necessarily for waterfowl, but for many different types of birds, in particular coastal and wading birds and songbirds, was the hat industry. So the hat fashion industry was a huge killer of birds throughout the country, and things like the great egret. If you've ever been to a salt marsh in Rhode Island or a coastal area, you've probably seen these beautiful birds. They do breed here. I've stepped into a breeding colony of great egrets, and it's just the most amazing thing. They breed on our bay islands throughout the Narragansett Bay, and you can see they have these beautiful plumes coming off of the back of their body feathers, and these plumes are only there during the breeding season. So people would go out and hunt these birds and many other species of birds for that breeding plumage, because typically when birds are in breeding plumage, they're the most colorful or the most crisp looking, and they have the most beautiful feathers, and they would stick them on hats. And this was not good. So this became such a fad. I mean, you know how fashion fads take off and everybody's going to have the latest thing, whatever it might be. So this was just a huge, huge problem for our birds across the country. And it was a group of women who actually came together and banded together with this grassroots effort to say, hey, this is terrible. Why are we doing this? Let's stop. So because of this grassroots movement, it kind of deterred people from continuing to purchase these hats and kind of crash the market for bird feathers. And with the passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, that completely put a stop to all of that. So there's a huge laundry list of words here that are illegal in terms of doing things to birds, such as taking. So take could be killing a bird. So when we say, instead of saying killing, we say take. So take means kill, to remove, to harvest, any type of removal from the wild, whether that's lethal or non-lethal. Possession of bird parts, any birds themselves. So you can't just go out and capture a little goldfinch and take it in as your pet. That's against the law now. Eggs are included in this list as well, because the colonies of egrets, gull colonies were especially hit hard. If you've ever seen a gull colony, most folks probably have not. It's a very unique place to be. I won't say it's the most pleasant place to be, because there's a lot of flying debris, mostly poop that is coming at you, and the birds will dive bomb, but they nest on the ground. And there's just hundreds upon hundreds of nests all on the ground in this one area, and you can just walk around and scoop up the eggs. And people used to eat eggs that way. So that has been ended through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So this is still in effect today. U.S. Fish and Wildlife monitors cases, that violate the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We keep an eye on that. So another act that was extremely important for birds was the Duck Stamp Act. So this is kind of reversing the effects of market hunting. So the Duck Stamp Act requires all waterfowl hunters to purchase not only their hunting license, but a federal duck stamp. And here in Rhode Island, we also have a state duck stamp that you have to purchase as well. And 98 cents out of every dollar of the sale of that duck stamp goes into a migratory bird conservation fund. And that purchases wetland habitat for federal national wildlife refuges. So if you've been to Trustham Pond, Ninigret, Kettle Pond, these are some of our national wildlife refuges in the state, Satchwest out in Middletown. So those are all part of that system. But as you can imagine, buying wetland habitat is very beneficial for ducks and geese. So that, that's the target for the waterfowl hunters. So that's ensuring habitat that is safeguarded for those species so that they can continue to breed and prosper. And then that in turn supplies hunters with a nice population of birds to harvest, and it's sustainable. So that way we're not over harvesting, we're supporting those populations and conserving those populations for years to come. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of things that live in a wetland other than ducks and geese. So anything in that wetland habitat is going to benefit from the duck stamp, which is really cool. It's an amazing thing too, because there are people who are not waterfowl hunters who purchase these every year because they're like little mini works of art. There's an art contest every year that's run to get your painting on the duck stamp, which is really cool. So nowadays we don't market hunt, we don't mindlessly harvest. We actually monitor and conserve our bird species, and in particular waterfowl. Here in Rhode Island, we have quite a few different species of waterfowl, but one of the most common and well known is the Canada goose. So each year whether you like them or not, so I know that some folks are probably, oh, I love the geese, and other folks are probably like, oh, those geese, they're on my lawn, they're leaving a lot of poop and just disrupting everything, eating my grass. So this is not rounding up the geese to remove them. This is rounding up the geese to band them. So we put leg bands on each individual, and this is a very lightweight. It's made out of aluminum, so it does not hinder the bird at all. And we catch them when they're in a flightless period. So they're molting their feathers, they can't fly away. We can basically herd them like sheep up onto the shore with kayaks, and our staff all work together rapid fire to band the birds and determine the sex of the birds and the age as well, relative age. So we say hatch year or adult. They get this little leg band, and that band has individual number on it. And if a hunter harvests that bird, they turn in the band number, they report it to an online database. And that helps us track population sizes, helps us track migration. Are these resident birds? Are they migratory birds? Because we do have some subpopulations of Canada geese here in North America. So not all of them go south for the winter. You've certainly probably seen geese in the winter here. So we do have some resident birds, and it helps us track, recruitment as well. So we see, how many hatchier birds do we band this year? And the other cool thing is that, this will stay on the bird for the rest of their life. So we catch birds that have been banded in a spot before. We check out the band, make sure it's nice and neat so that it doesn't get caught on anything. And that way we can get data and say, wow, that bird was banded 5 years ago, or whatever it might be, in the same spot or maybe in a different spot. And this is something that we encourage volunteers to come help out with. So every summer, it's about the last week in June, first week of July, sometimes it's the last 2 weeks in June, because they're scouting for the birds, kind of seeing when they're molting. But around the end of June and around the 4th of July, we're banding geese, and we encourage you to come out and help with this project. It's a lot of fun. You can get in a kayak, you will get soaked. You may get bitten by a goose. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it is a really fun opportunity to get to see wildlife up close and personal, and do some field work. In terms of other waterfowl projects that we're doing, we do a lot of collaboration work with the University of Rhode Island, because our staff is pretty small, and there's just a lot, as you can imagine, that you could potentially research and monitor in the state. So we partnered with URI on a number of avian projects, but one of my personal favorites is the sea duck projects that we've done with URI. So there's been a number of graduate students who have tracked sea ducks using radio transmitters. So this is not like the band. The band is a passive mode of tracking a bird. If you catch the bird again, you read the band and you can see where it's been relatively. The radio transmitters are for birds that travel long distances that we're probably not going to catch again. So it's usually like a little backpack that goes on the bird. So it'll sit underneath their feathers, the little straps go underneath the wings, and they're very, very lightweight so that the bird can still fly and do all of the things that it needs to do. The technology is just amazing that they're able to do this. We just recently partnered on a project studying Atlantic brant, which is a small sea goose, and they are here in the winter. And the backpack transmitters are solar powered. They last for about 2 years. So the technology is just greatly increasing. And without this technology, we would not be able to know as much as we do about these birds. So you can see this map just looks like absolutely wackadoodle. What is going on in this map? So we're seeing a bunch of lines and pie charts, spanning from the high Arctic all the way down here, even almost to the mid-Atlantic. And this is all data that was compiled by Juliet Lamb. She's a postdoc at URI, and she's looking at not only the data that was collected by URI graduate students, but other waterfowl biologists throughout the US and Canada who are also tracking birds. And she's looking at 5 different species here. So we've got the common eider, the black scoter, surf scoter, white-winged scoter, and the long-tailed duck. And all of these birds spend the breeding season all the way up here in the upper reaches of Canada, very cold. Some of them will breed in boreal forest lakes. And as you can imagine, it's hard to access those areas. It's not like driving to the beach here. You can just look with your binoculars out at Beavertail and see these guys in January and February. Most knowledge that we have of sea ducks is when they're wintering south, but we don't have a lot of information about their breeding locations and how much time they're spending on the breeding grounds. So what these pie charts are telling us is that the amount of time that the birds are spending breeding, migrating in the spring, migrating in the fall, and wintering in an area. So the blue sections of the map of the pie are winter, the red are breeding, and then the yellow and the green are migration periods. So green is spring, yellow is fall. So basically, you can see if you're just looking at the colors here, I'm seeing a lot of green, yellow, and blue. So they spend the vast majority of their time either traveling or spending time resting and recuperating in the winter and feeding. And the Narragansett Bay is critical for these birds. So you can see a lot of the pie charts are up here in New England and like just eastern Canada. They spend a lot of time, migrating through here, staging, what we call staging. So they move to a spot, they rest, recharge, move on to the next spot to get to their final destination. And they're not spending that much time on the breeding grounds. It's a very short time that they're actually up there. So that's telling us that Rhode Island, New England coastal waters are critical for these birds that don't even lay eggs here. So we always think of birds, they're here, they're nesting. It's very important for us to protect nesting habitat. It's just as important to protect migration habitat and wintering habitat as well. If you're interested in sea ducks, I could go on and on forever about sea ducks, but Gabby and I run a program typically every January and February at Beavertail, and we're looking at doing it in some other spots as well, where you can come out and look for these birds. We provide binoculars, we hang out and we'll talk about sea ducks a little bit more in depth about their adaptations and how to identify them. And then we'll go out and we'll actually look at the birds. And this is a great gateway into bird watching because it's pretty easy to see them and they're very distinguishable from each other. So, if you've never been bird watching before, I highly recommend to come birding with me at Beavertail over the winter. Another project that we work on a lot with birds in mind is young forest habitat management. And that's because over 40 species of songbirds use young forest. So if you've never really heard of a young forest, it's not a very well-known habitat. We always think of the forest as just the forest, but forests come in different classes, age classes. So this behind me in this picture, with my friends here, this is a young forest. So you can see these are very small trees. They're very close together. You probably wouldn't want to go for a hike through there. Just not a very pleasant place. It's full of brambles and briars, but this is excellent nesting habitat for birds. It provides a lot of cover, provides a lot of food in the form of insects and shrubs as well. So you'll get a bunch of fruiting shrubs that will grow in the young forest, and it's really valuable habitat. The problem is in Rhode Island, we don't have a lot of this young forest habitat, and that's true throughout the region because our forests here in New England went through a period of intensive logging with the European settlers, cut down most of the forest, create a lot of farmland, abandoned the farmland, all the forest grew up at the same time, and then was cut again, went through a period of logging. So our forest here in Rhode Island is about 70 to 100 years old, most of it. So if you have every single patch of forest about the same age, you're not going to see this young forest habitat or a diversity of forest age classes across the landscape. So when I think of, what we want to see in terms of a forest landscape, I think of, we want to look at it like kind of like a quilt. So you see some mature forest here that is 70 to 100 years old, which has its value for a lot of wildlife. Then we have a little bit of, some meadow habitat, a little bit of shrubland, a little bit of young forest. So all of that working together creates a really healthy, diverse ecosystem. So what we do to create young forest, because we don't have a lot of natural disturbance on the landscape like fires, we suppress fire now because can't have wildfires raging, in people's backyards. Is what we do is we'll go out to our management areas and do a selective clear cut. So this is not cutting down all of the trees, but we selectively cut down a good chunk of the trees. And then we have what we call seed trees. So these are really exemplary oaks. Oaks are extremely valuable for wildlife. And this one we have a holly in there too. This was our great swamp clear cut. And we'll leave those trees there to drop their acorns and seeds. And then it becomes a little tree nursery. And in about 5 years, it starts to look like this. So you can see behind the edge of the clear cut, this is a section that was cut about 5 years ago at the time of this photo. And it's nice and thick and brushy and brambly. That's what we want. So we'll do this, on a small scale. I think the largest cut that we've done at the swamp is maybe 27 acres out of that 3,600. So there are places that are on reserve that will never be cut, and then other places that we cut and we kind of rotate it around. So we have a variety of forest ages all in one place, and it works pretty well. So this is just a kind of a diagram of like figuring out how forest succession works. So if we clear cut, we start with some small plants and maybe some little shrubs, and you see it, start to progress into the shrub stage. younger trees, young forest. Then we get into the mature forest, when you hit about 50 years, 100 years, and you can see your understory changes. So we really want this like dense understory. And obviously it's a cartoon, so it's not showing us what it looks like in real life. But dense understory is better for wildlife than a very sparse understory, because there's not a lot of cover, it doesn't provide a lot of food, and limited number of species will actually use that habitat. So the bird that we really think about when we think young forest, I know I said 40 species of birds, but there's this little guy, the American woodcock. He's also called the timberdoodle, the mudbat, the Labrador twister, and the bogsucker. A lot of fun folk names. We also run a program in the spring, in April and May. These birds do a very funny what's called a sky dance. So they twirl up into the air and come back down, and they make a very silly noise. I have a quick little video to show you if you've never seen or heard of this bird. I'd like to show you a quick video. So we're gonna click here, and I may have to reshare my screen for you guys. Bear with me one second.
Google Fi, a phone plan.
So we're gonna do a new share. Here we go. Okay, we're gonna have to skip an ad.
And by Google. Meet Simply Unlimited, our most affordable plan for unlimited data, calls, and text.
Skip an ad. Here we go. So here's our American woodcock, and he is doing his peent display. So this is their mating display. So he's making that call, and females are listening for that call, and you can see he's starting to turn. So he'll turn in all different directions to display that call. And they're very territorial. So he'll stake out, this is his little spot, and if another male comes in and tries to call from the same area, he'll bully him out of the way. They'll kind of have a little battle. So he'll do that a few times, and then eventually they'll take off into the air, spiral up, and then spiral back down to the same exact spot. So very cool little bird. You can see he's got these big eyes. Oh, there he goes. That's the sound of the sky dance. So we'll swap back to our PowerPoint. So we've done some collaborative projects at URI also on this bird. There's a student right now who is currently tracking woodcock with backpack transmitters. And Gabby and I went out this spring. If you're interested, we did a virtual program on young forest and the woodcock. So we have some great video of the birds being fitted with their little backpack transmitter, and how Colby is the graduate student, how he catches them. And he talks about how he tracks them as well. So that's on our YouTube channel if you'd like to check that out. So the woodcock is what we call an umbrella species. And an umbrella species just means if you manage habitat for a particular species, you're going to eventually manage habitat for a wide array of species that fit under the umbrella. So we've got quite a few birds here. I just picked and chose some of my favorites of those 40 songbird species that use young forest. But we also have things like bobcats, the New England cottontail, which is our native species of rabbit. The little guys that you probably see in your backyard are eastern cottontails, the introduced species that does very well on a lawn or a golf course or in a park. New England cottontail would not survive there. They like that brushy, brambly habitat. We're doing a lot of work to restore populations of this rabbit in collaboration with all of the New England states. This is kind of a widespread project, young forest habitat management. You've got a couple species of turtles here, the wood turtle and box turtle that will use young forest. Lots of different snakes. So I just picked the smooth green and the racer, two of my favorites. And you'll even get things that are typically deep forest species like the ovenbird or the scarlet tanager. These are birds that breed in that mature forest, but during the migration period in the fall and in the spring, they'll use young forest for habitat to get food. They'll also go into the young forest to find food for their chicks. So having young forest and mature forest fairly close together is really important for them to be close together. So the last project I'll talk about tonight before we get into some stuff and to get into our how you can help birds. So we'll talk about the Rhode Island Bird Atlas. So this is an awesome project that took 4 years to complete, and it's still going. We're in the process of publishing the results, but the Bird Atlas essentially just catalogs all of the birds that are here breeding in the state. And also, because Rhode Island is so tiny, it actually works to our advantage because we were able to do a migration and a wintering atlas, which is unprecedented. No other state has done that for the entire state. Usually bird atlases in other states are done for a portion of the state, but Rhode Island's tiny little size actually works to our advantage in this case. So the last atlas that we did was conducted in the 80s. And as you can imagine, things have changed. Our habitat has changed. Our species composition has changed. So you always have to be collecting data, over time in order to make sure that that data is accurate. So we worked with over 200 volunteers for this project, some real expert birders who helped out and went out and surveyed the whole state. We had 20 techs who were working on the project as well. And this was in collaboration with URI as well. And so far we've so during that breeding atlas, we documented 173 breeding species. So that's up from the 80s. We've added almost 10 species there since the 1980s. And we're still kind of crunching some of that data to get a total number, looking at the migration and winter atlas as well. So that'll be coming. So stay tuned on the bird atlas. But just to kind of explain how the data worked for this atlas, we've got, I picked one fairly common species that many people probably see at their backyard suet feeders or just hanging out in your yard, the Carolina wren. And these little guys are very cute and precocious. You'll see them hopping around. They'll often nest in your wreath on your deck, or in the case of my parents this year, they had one in a potted plant on their porch. They were just kind of building their nest in there, the petunias. And so this is kind of what our data looks like that's going to be in the published atlas. And it looks a little crazy, but it does make sense if we go and dive into it. So this map right here, this blue and green map, is showing us the blocks. So we split the state into 164 blocks or 165 blocks. And you have all of these blocks, and volunteers went out and bird watched in all of these blocks with their data sheets and documented which bird species they saw there and which ones they confirmed breeding. So they saw them on a nest, they were bringing nesting material around, or they were carrying food to young. So looking at, going around in these blocks, you can see this white color, this white block here is saying that it was only detected in the 80s in Atlas 1. This green block is showing us where it was only detected in our most recent atlas in 2015. And then we have the blue block that's showing us where both atlases, or it was documented in both. So pretty much the whole state is covered in Carolina wrens, right? They're pretty doing okay in the state. So we saw them in 155 blocks and breeding in 48. Now that seems like it's an increase since the 80s. And it could be an increase, maybe Carolina wrens are increasing throughout the state. But it could also just be because of effort, atlas efforts. So we had a lot of volunteers, super organized this time around, so maybe learn something from the last atlas and how we want to improve those survey methods. So some of the data could be indicating, oh, bird is on the rise, or maybe it's just we searched for it better. This next map is showing you the density of those observations. So obviously it was seen all the way across the state, but the highest densities were in these dark orange areas. And that's, if we look at this little graph here, that could be because most of the time, it seems like the most important habitats for Carolina wren are residential and what we're calling ruderal forests. So that's a young forest that's that can be considered like a power line, where you see a lot of shrubs and young trees. These guys like edge habitat, where there's like a shrub line at the edge of a forest. They'll use agricultural land as well. The least The least valuable habitats for them seem to be urban and wetland habitats. So, you probably don't have a lot of wetlands in your residential areas and your suburban areas. Um, so that's just kind of what the data looks like and how we're going through each of those 173 breeding species. There's a lot of work involved in analyzing all of that data. So we've seen some successes throughout this data. So for instance, the bald eagle, we get a lot of reports all the time. Oh my gosh, a beautiful picture of an eagle, amazing. If you look at the map here, this light colored block, nothing. So it should be yellow. If you're looking at your screen, it's hard for me to see. It should be like a light yellow, but we did not see this here in the 80s. There were no bald eagles here. And now we have them in 5 different blocks, and they've been confirmed nesting in 4 locations, which doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's a huge success because if you know anything about bald eagles, you know that our population across the country went down because of DDT use. And now that DDT has been banned, they've been able to make an enormous rebound. So it's really, really important to see this data, and really promising to see that data. So we're really happy that is a success. But also we've seen some declines as well, such as the ruffed grouse. So this is a young forest species. In the 80s, we saw it in 56 blocks, breeding in 29. And now we only saw it in 3 blocks, and it's breeding in 1 block. So not so great, right? And that's primarily due to habitat loss. So as I said before, young forest habitat, not really as widespread throughout the state anymore. We have obviously our cuts that we're doing on our management areas, trying to manage habitat for ruffed grouse and for other species. But we've lost a lot of that habitat. There's also some evidence that populations throughout the country may be suffering because of West Nile virus. There's a lot of research going into that. But this is a very popular game bird throughout the country, and it's a beautiful bird. It's just so cool. I've only seen them in a couple of places, and right now you can only really find them in one spot here in Western Rhode Island. So hopefully our habitat management strategies, when we look at data like this, we say, oh my gosh, like what happened to them? So that only supports the decisions to manage habitat accordingly to help assist these species and other species as well. So obviously all of us do not have 3,600 acres to play with and manage habitat for birds on a large scale, but there's quite a lot that we can all do in our own little mini habitats to help birds. So the first and most important thing that we all can do is to improve our backyard habitat. And backyard could be anything from, I own 10 acres of land to I own 1/10 of an acre of land. You can make a huge difference in a small space because think about it, if everybody does that, if you live in a suburban neighborhood with little tiny postage stamp lots that are all close together, if everyone works together to do something to improve the habitat for the birds, then you've just effectively created a larger habitat, through this ripple effect. So I have highlighted here planting native shrubs and wildflowers. And this is just, Gabby knows this, this is like my pet cause of just encouraging people to plant native shrubs and wildflowers. And the reason is that natural food for birds is the most valuable thing that we can provide for them. So whether that's, planting, native, we have some native shrubs, native wildflowers. Gabby's going to put in the chat a link to the URI Master Gardeners Native Plant Database. This is an awesome place to get started if you're like, I don't even know the native plants. I don't know what to plant. I don't even know where to get native plants. It's an awesome resource. You can type in like your yard conditions, like my yard is full sun and dry soil, what would grow there? And they give you a list of plants. And then you can also see which Rhode Island plant nurseries sell those plants, which is an awesome resource. So it's kind of like helping you out. So if you don't have to go out and learn every single native plant in order to help birds. So the native fruiting shrubs are incredibly important. Fruits are hugely important for a lot of different birds throughout the summer and also through migration and even winter. We have some bushes that hold on to their berries throughout the winter, and that provides food for birds when the landscape is barren. Wildflowers, we say, so you have hummingbirds that will pollinate those wildflowers and go around and sip the nectar. But what wildflowers really do is attract insects, and insects are the building blocks of birds. So if you want birds, you want insects. So I put this picture here, Bringing Nature Home. This is an awesome book by Doug Tallamy. He also has a bunch of talks on YouTube. I highly encourage taking a look at his stuff because he talks about how important it is just for our own little backyards. You know, if you can support, you know, caterpillars, it sounds silly, but the more caterpillars you have, the more birds you're going to have, because caterpillars build baby birds. They are the primary food source for baby birds. So if you can support lots of caterpillars and other insects through the use of native plants and the presence of native plants, then you're effectively helping birds and create this awesome little oasis in what would be, you know, normally a barren wasteland of lawn and concrete, and there's nothing of value for birds there. I also have some other tips. You know, if you have a larger property and it's okay, you can leave dead snags. So that's what we call just a standing dead tree. We leave them on our clear cuts. We'll purposely say, oh, that tree is dead, leave it up, because that's an awesome habitat for woodpeckers, for even bats will use the tree cavities. And as that wood rots, you get insects in there. It's a buffet for a lot of different birds. And if you can't leave a dead tree up, obviously, you know, we just cut down a tree in my yard. It was hollow on the inside. It was unsafe to leave up, but we left some of the sections of the tree. We made like little side tables for our patio and just like put the stump down as like a place to put your snack or your drink while you're sitting at the fire pit. And I see woodpeckers hanging out on the stumps all the time. I have a dead branch that I just left, you know, on the edge of the yard. And that works too. So it could just be on the ground. You don't have to necessarily make your yard unsafe. Also, building nest boxes can really help if you don't have a lot of trees in your yard, or if you're kind of, you know, going for more of a meadow habitat. You know, bluebird boxes are great. And the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has awesome templates for all different species. So depending on what you'd like to attract to your property, they have the guidelines on how to make it. And Gabby's going to toss that in the chat as well. So now I want to bring up this Eastern Songbird epidemic because this is in the news this week. So it's very very prevalent that we need to do this and to take advantage of the time to talk about it. So birds, it's just so crazy how birds can get sick so quickly and it turns into an epidemic. I'm sure everybody's heard of bird flu or avian influenza. So it can get pretty serious pretty quickly. And we're seeing this with the Eastern Songbird epidemic. So this right now is currently in the DC area. It's not here in Rhode Island. We have not had any confirmed cases here, but it is incredibly important that we're all vigilant and taking preventative measures to avoid the spread of this disease. So it seems to be affecting birds that are commonly at bird feeders and bird baths. So our backyard birds like blue jays, robins, finches, anything that you might see at your feeder. Finches are particularly susceptible. Grackles, I know we have a lot of grackles in my neighborhood. So to prevent that spread in Rhode Island, we're asking folks to please take down your bird feeders and your bird baths and clean them with a 10% bleach solution, and then leave them absent until we have more information, because this is very serious. You know, these birds, there's no cure for this that we know of. So they've got these crusty eyes, and an impaired movement, a lot of neurological issues. And you know, think about it. We're basically there's an article that Gabby's going to post in the chat from Audubon, from the National Audubon Society, and the article said we're basically recommending social distancing for birds. So we don't want to encourage all the birds to conglomerate in one area at your feeder in your yard, because that's going to pass disease much quicker than if they were all kind of spread out and looking for food naturally in the environment. So that being said, you know, it's not here yet as far as we know, but we are looking for observations of dead or sick birds. So there's a link in the chat Gabby's going to post. So if you observe any birds, we'd love to hear about it. It's a quick survey that you can fill out, and you know, people find birds. You know, I found a dead baby bird yesterday on my walk with my dog, and it does happen naturally in the environment, but you know, this happens out in nature, in the woods, you know, more often than we know, but it's not right under our noses, you know, so it looks suspicious when it's in our neighborhoods, like, oh no, what happened to that baby bird? But it's it's really, we're looking for like 10 to 15 dead birds over the course of a short period of time that we're seeing. Oh my gosh, that's a large number that all of a sudden just died, as opposed to one or two. So that's natural mortality, and death is a part of nature. So if you see something, obviously if you see like a bird, two birds, of course you can submit them through that form, because cumulatively that will add up if all of a sudden people start seeing lots of dead birds all over the place. But if you see one or two, that's not like, oh my gosh, cause for alarm, but we're really looking for 10 to 15. So that means, I know it's hard, we all love to see our birds at the feeders, but this is something that is going to be good for the birds in the long run. So just some guidelines outside of the epidemic. If you are feeding birds, over the winter or whatever it might be, you should always be keeping your bird feeders clean. 10% bleach solution, regular cleaning, because birds can get sick on the regular anyways. Conjunctivitis is a big problem, especially with house finches. And if feeders aren't kept clean, you can get a lot of mold if the seed is not kept dry, and mold is toxic to birds. And also we recommend, even though people love to feed the birds, we're saying remove them now during the summer. They probably should be down anyways. We recommend March through November to remove them, because it's bear time. So especially if you live in Western Rhode Island, Northwestern Rhode Island, Southwestern Rhode Island, the entire western half of the state. I'm in Cranston, and there were bear sightings in Cranston. But we have black bears here. We do have a handful of resident bears, and they love birdseed. They are essentially big birds. So they love birdseed. It's fatty, it's high protein, it's really delicious to them, and they just can't resist it. So you may end up by turning your bird feeder into a bear feeder if you leave it up, throughout the summer. If you're in the Providence area, you probably don't have to worry as much, or the East Bay, but definitely the western half of the state, you probably should really take your bird feeder down March through November. But all that being said, if you are going to feed the birds, what can I feed the birds? So as I said before, natural food provided by habitat is by far the best option for birds. That is the healthiest. It supports their growth and development, especially for those little chicks that are in the nest. They really need those insects in order to get big and strong. But if you are going to be feeding the birds, we recommend clear liquid for hummingbirds, so 1-to-4 ratio of sugar to water. You can boil the sugar in the water just briefly, and then you can put it in a container, put that in your fridge, and that'll last for about a week. But we recommend, you can see this feeder right here is only half full. You don't want to fill it all the way to the top, because if you only got 2 little hummingbirds coming, they can drink it down, but if it's hot, that can spoil really quickly. So you fill it up only a quarter or halfway, let them drink it down, scrub out the feeder, replenish it quarter or halfway, depending on how big your feeder is, and then let them drink it down so that they're consistently eating that food and it's not sitting for a long period of time. There should be no red dye in it. There should be no artificial sweeteners, not even natural sweeteners like honey or anything like that. It should just be plain white sugar and water. And the reason why we want you to clean it out so frequently and you should hang it in the shade is because sugar turns into mold. So mold is very toxic for hummingbirds, and it can cause their little tongues to swell, and then they're not able to eat, and it can be lethal. So I'm like, when I put my hummingbird feeder out, I am fastidious about cleaning it and making sure I clean it every 2 to 3 days, and just kind of keeping that nectar very fresh. So seeds or fruit are great for birds. So seed feeders, of course, you can put out orange slices for orioles. Natural seeds, you're talking about like sunflower seeds. You can also plant flowers that produce seeds, like coneflower is a great seed producer. I always have little goldfinches on my coneflowers every year, but no bread or food scraps. And we're going to talk about why in a second. We do not want folks feeding waterfowl. So we say feeding birds, we really mean like cutesy little backyard birds. Feeding waterfowl, not good. We just had an issue actually in Cranston. Someone was feeding geese in her driveway, just throwing out a bunch of bread for the geese. And now we have a rat problem in the city because they were all attracted to the bread that she was throwing out. So not only does it cause other critters to come around, it's really not great for the waterfowl. And we'll talk about why. And of course, as we said, set them up in November, take them down in March, and keep cleaning them throughout the season. The bread is terrible for birds. Nobody told that lady in Mary Poppins. I feel betrayed. Because my childhood, I love this movie. And she's feeding bread to the birds, but it has no nutritional value. It's like us eating potato chips for every single meal, right? Tastes good, fills my stomach. Am I going to be healthy? Absolutely not. So and no nutritional value. Moldy bread, a lot of people throw out old bread for birds. Mold is toxic. Large pieces of bread can actually get stuck in their crop, which is part of their digestive system, and can cause blockages. It can also cause growth abnormalities. So this is a condition called angel wing. This bird cannot fly. It was fed bread from an early age, did not get the nutrition that it needed, and as a result has a bone deformity. And it can also cause dependency and aggression too. So you can have birds that are constantly dependent on people and they don't know, like, oh my gosh, I have to get my food from people. I don't know how to take care of myself anymore. And then you can also get the other the other way around is that you're being chased by geese in Roger Williams Park because they're like, where's my snack? So we really do not want that to happen. We would prefer the birds to be independent, know how to naturally feed themselves, and to have that natural fear of humans. So that they just remain wild. We want to keep the wildlife wild. It's the healthiest for them and the best for them. So another thing that we get a gazillion calls about is what do I do if I find a baby bird? So we have this great comic. It's from Bird and Moon Comics. She has a lot of really fun educational nature comics out there. I highly recommend you take a look at them. So if you find a baby bird, what do I do? So is it visibly injured? Did your cat go after it? Does it look like it's got a broken wing? Anything like that? If yes, it's visibly injured, you should contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Gabby's going to put in the chat the contact information for the Wildlife Rehabilitators Association of Rhode Island. They're excellent. You can give them a call at any time. They have rehabbers all across the state who can help you out and scoop up that little baby bird and nurse it back to health. Now, if it's not visibly injured, there's kind of like a choose your own adventure here. So if it's pretty much like pink and bald and the eyes are closed, that's a hatchling, so it's very, very young. And if you can see the nest, then you can just pop it right back into the nest. Mom's not going to smell the baby, smell you on the baby or anything. She's just going to take care of it, no sweat. If you can't see the nest, you can make a little nest out of a basket and kind of put it to like wire it up to a tree or a shrub that's nearby. The parent may be able to come in and find it and feed it again. If when in doubt, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this little thing, you can always call the rehab clinic and they'll take it and nurse it back to health. If its eyes are open, it has a few little feathers, they look like kind of like little straws sticking out of their wing. You have a nestling. So this little guy, he's still dependent on mom and dad. So if, again, same thing, if you can see the nest, pop him back in. If not, put him back into, create a little nest or call a rehabber if you're really unsure. Now, if you've got this little awkward little thing here that pops and flutters around, it doesn't really have a tail, it's got these little short wings, but it's mostly feathered, and the eyes are open. This is a fledgling. So fledglings are learning how to fly. They should be out of the nest. They're hopping around, they're learning how to move their bodies, and they really should be left alone. But if it's in immediate danger, yes, oh my gosh, the cat's going to get to it. It's in a road or a driveway. We're mowing the lawn, something like that. Then you should carefully, you can just scoop it up and move it to a safer spot nearby. If it's not in immediate danger, leave it be. It's totally fine. It's really hard. I know everybody's like, oh, what do I do? Just leave it alone. My parents called me the other day, one of the little babies from the petunia plant on their porch landed. He was a fledgling and he landed on the porch and they were like, what do we do? What do we do? What if the cat gets it? There's a cat across the street. So I said, just leave it alone. My dad put up a little fence so the cat couldn't get on the porch and he was gone. He was fine. He just flew away and found his way. But if you end up by like checking on it every 2 seconds, that can actually deter the parents from coming back and feeding it because they think you're a predator or they're not trying to cause any attention, to their baby. So it's best to just kind of step back, leave it alone, maybe look out your window, but let nature take its course. And of course, you could also find a dinosaur, and they suggest that you run away if you find a dinosaur. Okay, so if you want to get into bird watching, you have no idea where to start. There's tons of resources out there. So the Cornell Merlin app is wonderful. It's a free app that you can download. I think it's for iPhone, and I think they have an Android version now as well. This is super cool. It's like, I saw this bird here. It was perching in a tree. It has like kind of a dichotomy that you could say, oh, it was blue and white and black. It was small. And then you click submit my bird, and it gives you like 5 different options of what bird it could potentially be. So it's very helpful in learning birds that you don't know. If you do know which bird you're looking at, you can go to allaboutbirds.org, and that will, you can type in cardinal, and it'll bring you to the cardinal page and give you tons of information, videos, calls, all sorts of stuff like that. But folks are like, oh my gosh, so I need, if you look at like serious bird watchers, they've got the scope, they've got the giant camera lens, they've got the $1,000 binoculars, and it can look intimidating. I've never bird watched before. Do I need to get all that stuff? Absolutely not. You can get a very affordable pair of binoculars, that maybe aren't the fanciest binoculars in the world, but they'll give you a little bit of magnification. And even if you don't want to grab binoculars, learning bird calls and songs is like a game changer, because you can go anywhere with your ears and listen, and you can bird watch by ear. No binoculars needed. So it's like the cheapest way of becoming a birder. Getting an app, a free app, and learning those calls. The calls are on the app as well, so you can listen and learn as you go along. Those are my recommendations for getting started as a bird watcher. And of course, you can come to our Come Birding With Me events. We do them in the winter for the sea ducks, but we also do them in the spring and the summer for songbirds and other birds that are here during the breeding season as well. Super low pressure. We have a lot of fun. You do not have to be an expert. You could just be like, I know what a robin is, and show up, and you'll definitely learn something about birds and enjoy it. So I have talked a lot. We have maybe about 5 minutes to 7. And we'd love to take some questions. I've seen the chat like blowing up, so I'm sure that there's questions. Before we hop into questions, I just want to say, if you want to connect with us about any of our other programs or learn more about wildlife in little snippets, we have an Instagram, we have a Facebook page. We also have a monthly email list, which, as you registered for this program, you could have elected to get that monthly email. So we advertise about more events like this. And when in doubt, you can always go to the wildlife outreach page on our website. So I am going to stop recording so that we can all see each other. So we're going to